All right, so tonight's class is how to pay for college without going broke. And my company is called Crystal Clear College Planning. My name is Crystal Tate. I have been doing this for 11 years. This is my 11th year in the industry, and I do all of the stuff that we are about to talk about this evening. So my background is in finance. I did go to Western Washington University up in Bellingham, and I graduated with a degree in finance and then went into the financial planning industry thinking that that was the thing I wanted to do. Come to find out, it was not. But I got lucky that the guys that hired me were super great and introduced me to this concept of college planning. And I have been doing it ever since. They actually, at the beginning of time, helped me launch my business and believed in me enough in order to make that happen. And I'm super glad that I discovered it because it's way funner to work with parents and students figuring out colleges and dealing with all the financial aid stuff. By the way, that is my life right now in regards to seniors. So really, I live and breathe everything that has to do with college planning. So do feel free. I do my best throughout tonight to answer questions in the chat box. But we are gonna dive in and get into all of this goodies. So really, one of the big things I tend to hear from people is this public versus private school conversation. And usually I will hear two things. Crystal, private school is too expensive, so why would we talk about that? And then two, some kids also don't think they're sometimes smart enough to go to a private school. So we just talk about how if you can see it as a fit, it can be a possibility. And then the two components of this whole college thing is what we call student positioning and financial positioning. And so it is taking all that stuff about our kid, matching it up in terms of the best financial fit and for our schools, right? And marrying those two things together. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And then we're going to go through some case studies so that you understand really how this whole process of things works. Okay. But this is where I want you to use the chat box for me first and foremost, is hearing from you guys how much you think college costs. And I always talk all inclusive. So tuition, room and board, books, miscellaneous expenses, put it in the chat for a public school for 1 year. How much do you think this all-inclusive college cost is going to be for 1 year? Public school. I love how we start out strong at 50K. Right, 35, 28. Got a lot of 30s and consistent. Yep. And this is what's fun, right? Is that you guys are all right. And I'm sure we're going to see what parts of the country everybody's from here soon. But it is about 27,000 is the average, but if you're looking at some of the, out of state schools, right? I'm in Washington state. And if you go to California and you want to go to a UC school, those are like $55,000, $60,000, $65,000 a year, right? So it gets kind of crazy in terms of that sticker price. But like even our flagship school, University of Washington, is about $30,000-ish a year. Okay. So definitely we've got perspective there. Now, next one, of course, is I'm going to call this the normal private schools. Guys, how much do you guys think it's going to be all inclusive for just a run of the mill private school that may be in your backyard or across the country? 50, 70, 60, 80. It's my least favorite number nowadays. Yes. Right. And this is that insanity. It is, a lot of you are in that range, right? It's about $55,000 a year, but this is also what we call sticker price, right? Nobody likes to pay sticker price for anything. So this is part of our game, is understanding then where do we have this opportunity to bring down this cost, right? And when we start looking at those elite schools, that is where that 80,000 or more per year is now in play. And I will make this disclaimer that the elite private schools are often the exception to a lot of what we talk about tonight. So you also have to understand that they also have their own whole set of rules. We could do a whole class just on all of that jazz. But really we're focusing on the majority of the universities rather than that small select subset. So if there are specific questions around that though, obviously let me know. Okay, and of course, right, prices are going up and up, which is why we continue to have this conversation about how best we can bring it down. So first we talk about the public versus private school bit. And this is because here you have to go first thinking about what the college's goals are, which isn't always natural to think about. And to say, right, like some of the big state schools, like a University of Washington or a flagship of any state, tend to be more known for their research opportunities and their graduate level programs, and they'll have a lot of money to do all of that. But then often that means that by the wayside will be the undergraduate students, or there may be not as much of a focus as to kind of the support that the university is giving. And how we really see that play out is then, like, you know, you could go into Chem 101 and there could be 400 kids in that class. And the professor is going to say, you know what, you guys are all qualified, you got here. But at the end of the day, we grade on a curve, and statistically, you know, not everybody's going to make the cut. Hold on, gotta swat a kitten. Just trying to attack a gecko. And so if we're kind of weeding kids out in that, like in that kind of environment, then that doesn't always set us up for success in making sure that we are the most supported and getting in and out of that college in 4 years and all of those sorts of things that are important to us as well. And, you know, you might do well in any university, no matter where you go, if maybe you're a 4.0 student, but I also go back to bad kitten behavior. I also go back to what is the best fit for a kid at any point in time, and looking at schools, whether they be big or small, and making sure yet again they're being set up for success. So if you maybe are an average or below average student and walking into a 400-person classroom doesn't do it for you, then maybe we want to look at the other side, where the small to mid-sized state or private schools are going to have teachers actually teaching the classes, and they're going to be there to help hold kids accountable and have more of that one-on-one support. Okay. A lot of this does also come back down to graduation rates, because this is also the big dirty secret of this whole college process, is that we can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on college and not necessarily come out with a diploma and a piece of paper at the end of the day. Okay. Now, when we start looking at examples for graduation rates, this is for Washington State, but it's going to be similar across the country. The point is just understanding some do a better job and some do a worse job. Eastern Washington is one of our state schools, and 53% will graduate in 6 years. Okay. Now, on the other hand, Seattle Pacific is one of our private schools, and 68% will get out in 4 years. Really, I just want to know how much this is going to cost me by the time I am done. So if I go to Eastern and they're $23,000 a year, all inclusive, and we go for 6 years and we spend $138,000, but we don't have that wonderful piece of paper by the time we are done. Okay. And then on the other side, the average cost at Seattle Pacific is $32,000 a year. That's not their sticker price, but we will talk about that. For 4 years, we go for 4 then, right? Save some time. And then we only spend $128,000. My moral to this is always, just because it looks cheaper doesn't always mean it's the cheapest school on your list by the time you are done. So making sure as well that you dive into a questionable statistic. So I think a really great example too that has come up has been Boise State recently, where as a state school, their graduation rate isn't good, but they instituted what they call a 4-year graduation guarantee. So if you as a student have done everything in your power to get your classes and, you know, communicate with your professors and whatever that checklist is for them, and it's the university's fault you can't get into your classes in order to graduate in 4 years, the university will pay your tuition in order to have you finish, right? That is then them making that commitment to a student. But that doesn't always reflect in the statistics, because they're usually a couple years behind in terms of reporting that data out to the world. So I think that it's always good to be like, oh, they have a 28% graduation rate. Is that also related to the nursing program takes students 5 years to get out? Or have they instituted this thing like Boise where they're really, you know, like supporting kids now, right? So take it another step further in regards to making sure you find that out. Enrica, how do you find out which school is which in terms of the type of school that we're, research based or not? And there's all of the acronyms in this world sometimes will just kind of make your mind boggle. So I apologize in advance. But it's called an R1 research school, is where universities are getting funding specifically for doing research. However, not everybody on that list is necessarily, I'm going to call it like a bad research school all the time. But what I've noticed is, so I went to go visit Regis and University of Puget Sound. And those are two smaller private school examples that I think University of Puget Sound put this really well. We are a teacher first institution, and you'll hear this from them if you get to know the universities more, is that the professors do research. It's not like it doesn't exist. It's just that it's not their primary focus in terms of the university getting funding in order for them to do research. They're doing it to get kids engaged, for them to have the hands-on experience. And so they do summer research projects where students get to work with professors and they get $5,000 to fund that research project. The university did that for 1,000 students last year. Right? Like that's the kind of stuff that it's like, oh, well, that's one, useful, right? Like they're getting engaged, they're doing stuff, they're working with professors in a field that they're interested in, whether it's an art research project, business, biology, it's across all fields. And that's what they've incorporated into their school, versus it being, we have money to do research, which means the professors aren't in the classroom. And instead, what they're doing is their research. And then we've got TAs or what have you teaching the class. So that's really kind of that thing to dive into and finding that answer. And we always talk about goals in my world. So we say it's nice to get a private education and do it at a public education price. But I'm also a public school grad, right? Like by no means am I against it. It's just that we still like to do it at the lowest possible cost. Now, first, we're going to talk about our kiddos and what we call student positioning. And this is taking all of those attributes of our kids and then matching that with what they want in a school. And then we go, oh, by the way, it'd be really nice to get some money. So this is the first poll that I'm going to put up here as we're getting ready to talk about SAT and ACT, is letting me know what graduation year your student is. And we're going to talk about the timing of all of this fun SAT, ACT stuff. And because we're in the throes of applications right now, it also has been eye-opening and looking at, some of the schools' testing policies and whether they truly are test optional, as they say, or in their fine print, it essentially says that we consider, them as an important role in determining your strength as a student at the school. Therefore, you really should be submitting them, but they list themselves as test optional, right? The kind of shadiness that we get to see in all of this. Okay, so we got juniors for the win, barely, followed by sophomores. We got a couple of seniors, which is awesome, and then some freshmen. So welcome to the club, guys. All right. We'll stop that. So the difference here in terms of SAT and ACT really isn't as drastic as people may think it is. Okay. It really tends to come back to kids have an aptitude typically for one versus another, or they're like the style of the way one test is. So we use what we call an SAT, ACT diagnostic test in order to figure out a student's aptitude, because it's 1 3.5-hour exam that's going to give us the side-by-side results. And then we're going to see, okay, are you more of an SAT kid or are you more of an ACT kid? It's going to give us a baseline score. And then we're going to be able to say, okay, with some study, you should get to XYZ, and now you should get registered for whichever date. All right. Now, the point of figuring out our aptitude is the colleges don't care which one you take. I swear to you, I've been doing this for 11 years and it has not changed during that period of time, which is why we want students to figure out which one they have that aptitude. I launch kids in doing this at the end of their sophomore year. Okay. So essentially, if you're a junior, you should be figuring out which test is your test now, right? So that then you have more of a launch pad in terms of being able to study and maybe take the test a couple times here in junior year and then be done with it is always a life goal. Okay. Now, we talk about kind of a sweet spot in terms of score for these. The SAT is out of a 1600, the ACT is out of a 36. Kind of a typical range that a lot of schools start to fall into is probably about a 28 to a 32 on the ACT, and then about a 1300 to a 1450 or so on the SAT. Now, really, it just means the higher you get in terms of the number, the more schools you're going to have that you're going to be strong academically at. And so it just kind of opens up more of our opportunities. And it's frustrating. Trust me, I know it's frustrating because we still, like, especially over these last couple of years with the schools saying, yes, we are test optional for the sake of admissions. And some of them, as you read the fine print, the answer is no, not really. And there's a fair amount as well that are still giving merit scholarships based on having the highest scores for the incoming freshman class. So if it doesn't have to do with admissions, it often has something to do with getting scholarships. And we want to make sure, I think George Washington says it the best, that you have it in your back pocket if you need it. And if you're not a strong test taker, then you cross that bridge when you get there and figuring out how much of an impact it really has at the schools that you're looking at. Okay. And I have kids in that camp every year as well. And then yet again, we just look at the schools and we determine what is the impact, if there is any, in terms of admissions or financial aid. And then we move forward. Now, when should we, I kind of mentioned this, but I'm going to clarify when should you take these tests? Right now for juniors, I have a lot of kids kind of aiming for the February exam so that then they have time to get some study in, like I was saying, and take it. And then if they're not happy with their score, they can take it a little bit later in the spring. And then we kind of go, last ditch effort is to take it in senior year. If you, still are not happy with your score, it is typical to take it 2 to 3 times. But I always tell kids a really awesome incentive is if you study for the first one and you do really well, you don't ever have to take it again. Okay. Now, the ACT does still have a writing section component, like an actual essay. Thus far, Canadian schools are a big requirement for wanting that. So if you're not yet sure, kind of in the United States, there's like a handful of schools that nobody typically applies to that still want the essay portion. But outside of that, it's typically if you're applying to international stuff that they're going to ask for it. So just keep that in mind when you're getting registered on whether you need to torture your student with the actual essay portion, if that's not their strength, or if you just want to have them take it in order to have it, you can definitely do so as well. Now, I always ask kids, right, is studying for these tests important? And I tell everybody they should go like this and nod their heads and say, yes, Crystal, it is. And I honestly don't care how you do it. I just care that you have the motivation to do so. The test prep companies will typically tell you that if you want a 1-point increase in your ACT score, expect to put about 10 hours of study in. Okay, so if you go, oh, I came out at a 27 and I want to get to a 32, then you can do the math roughly on how much time you should be putting into studying in order to reach your goal. So it also starts to give an incentive as you start looking at your schools and say, oh, this school wants me to have a 1450, or this school only wants me to have a 1200, right? Then it's not even us telling them that they've got to reach XYZ goal. It's the schools and us putting into perspective then what an ideal range is to hit in order to maximize our opportunities. And so I go with, if your kid is motivated enough to use a book, awesome. We use an online program called ePrep. So it's practice tests and video tutorials so that they're focusing in on the content that they need to learn. And then they build a study schedule so that they can stay on track. But if you know that they're not going to do anything unless they sit one-on-one with a tutor, then so be it. Okay, whatever works for them and whatever works within your budget is really kind of the best marriage in between all of this. But the number one thing is just making sure that you're getting the time in terms of that content and getting used to really also the style of just taking these kinds of exams for the sake of taking them. Okay, now this is an article, it's been running around for a while, but it's a college administrator got caught faking an SAT score for Claremont McKenna. So I ask you, put this in the chat box for me and tell me what you think. Why in the world would somebody risk their livelihood, right? And in order to fake a test score for a college? What do you think the university is going to get out of reporting a higher test score? What do you think? If I'm a college and I get to report a higher test score, what's that going to do for me in the grand scheme of things? Put it in the chat box for me. Can't let you guys off the hook yet. Yes. Money and rankings and all the good stuff that goes along with it. Okay, so there tends to be this philosophy, right, that if a school looks better in US News and World Report and Princeton Review, then obviously it must be a better school. And that makes alumni happy, and happy alumni often donate the money, right? So it's this vicious cycle in regards to everything. And we're not going to get on the rankings soapbox tonight, but it's something that I always tell clients you got to take with a grain of salt, because they're manipulated by the colleges. So you got to be careful. I mean, all statistics are like that for the sake of what they want to report and what they want people to see. But you have to understand this grand scheme, though, is often going back to test scores. Why you'll see in the fine print for testing policies, and they even had it at University of Washington, was we're going test optional, we're not taking scores. But if you score well, and I think it was a 1460 that they used as their well number, then we want you to report it. Well, why would we want you to report it if we're test optional? Because it makes them look better in the marketplace, which increases their rankings and gets them more money in the vicious cycle. Okay. And that's really that grand scheme of everything, is that it's really all just the perception of it. But if you are scratching the college's back, sometimes that can put us in a good position as well to get some extra money from them because we're making them look good. Okay. So it's also just kind of that business side of everything. We don't like it. We're just learning to play the game. Okay. Now, of course, we do know that there is more to our kids than just test scores. So here we've got GPA and rigor of schedule, which is making sure that we're taking those challenging courses, but also, of course, maintaining our GPA. So the fine balance in this is not feeling like you need to take all of the AP classes or do the IB diploma if that's not your thing and you're not going to do well academically. So we want you to make sure, if you're more of a STEM kid, that you're taking your science and math classes that are, you have an interest in. Don't take AP US history if you know that all the busy work and history not being your thing is going to yet again tank your GPA, right? So be smart about what it is that you're choosing. And we always go over all of this in January every year as kids are starting to select their classes and figuring out, right, how can we best balance out with what we're interested in, what we want to explore, what our extracurricular activities are, and all of that other good stuff. Which leads into our next one is, well, extracurricular activities. And right now, the good news is probably for some of you, right, is that now we're getting back into the swing of things. And the bad news is your kids are super busy. And so they do still also have this balancing act of figuring out, well, what can I do? And yet again, still be able to get all my homework done. I've been hearing that a lot lately. So extracurricular activities in the eyes of the college, it comes in for a few different ways, is making sure then, if you take on stuff, they like to see leadership, they like to see longevity of an activity and commitment, right, to things. And also if you have kind of areas of interest, whether it be hobby-wise that's got some depth to it, or within an area of interest that you're exploring, and or being able to show that you're exploring these different areas to figure out what it is that you're interested in, right? Are all great ways to kind of showcase yourself. And then most colleges are also going to ask this, well, what else are you interested in doing when you step foot on campus? And if it relates back to an activity you've currently been involved in, right, then that makes sense in terms of how you're going to engage with the community. So start to working with students to make sure that they are thinking of what kinds of activities they can be involved in. We just had a meeting with our juniors and going through some of those resources and how best we could start to take advantage of that kind of stuff. Diversity, though, is also opening up our scope and realizing that it's not just ethnic diversity anymore, it's geographic diversity. And this is where I have my final poll that I want to hear from you guys. It says high school on here, but then I don't always remember which state each of these are in. So put it in the chat box for me and let me know, what state are you guys in, as we're talking about this diversity piece of everything. So when it comes to like us being in, like I'm in Washington State, right? Like if I had I've often made it like my goal in life to get kids to look at schools in different locations that's not just the Pacific Northwest. And it's fun because then we can start to explore these different opportunities, schools that have really fun programs, right? All of this different stuff. But then a lot of people don't realize that you also check a diversity box for the colleges, right? So then that means that if they're looking for a kid from Washington to go to New York or to go to Ohio, that's a benefit, right? Or vice versa. So, and I have clients now all across the country, right? That's the beauty of getting to do all of this virtually. So I was trying to kind of tally it up, and I should actually do that. Texas, but going to New York schools. That's fancy. Yeah, so we've got some Texas, some New York, some Ohio, some Washington, right? Like California, I think I saw in there too. And then, yeah, so, and high school wise, am I missing this? Did I totally screw up my poll? Are you guys not from any of these high schools? I think I mean, Edmonds and North Shore, I mean, that's just my Washington group. So yeah, Texas is so competitive. Yeah, and I have a couple of clients in Texas this year, and it's been, now it's like the top 6% get in, where it was the top 10% get into the Texas schools. So we've got all of these different things, right? I have clients in Florida and North Carolina, Ohio, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, Idaho, Washington, of course, Oregon, California. I'm sure I'm missing somebody somewhere, right? Like everywhere. So it's one where it's fun to, yet again, like get to explore. It doesn't matter what part of the country we're in, right? It's the same everywhere. And just recognize that if colleges are having, wanting a kid from a certain location, just adds another benefit to it. So when you start to kind of also look outside of your geographical area, it can be a bonus for us. Student interest. This is also a topic that we were just covering, is understanding that the colleges like to know who you are, and just being an application sometimes doesn't really do much in terms of them, what we call showing demonstrated interest, which really is putting that kind of best foot forward. And, there's lots of different ways that we can engage. And that's one of those things we talk about. If we can't get on campus in person, can we do it virtually, or what are those other things, right? Actually, that's our November 1st topic, because we're going over that as well as talking about college visits. So this is where you can, one thing will then tie into the other, but it's the colleges are tracking that sort of data and information. So there is a certain list of schools, and I think I have it queued to share with you guys on the Facebook group already is there's 99 colleges that that demonstrated interest has an impact for them for the sake of admissions. And sometimes it can also have an impact for the sake of scholarships for some, and making sure that you really are interested and converting to be at their school. But I also like to give a little kind of warning too, is you don't want it to necessarily be a one and only. And you still want to make sure that you have a good, well-rounded list, and showing interest across the board at your schools is good. Essays. Seniors, hopefully you're almost done with this and wrapping it up. I know I've been reading a lot of final essays for kids lately, and it's one of my also favorite parts of the year because it's really nice to kind of gain another level of perspective about kids that you work with that you didn't necessarily know about. And then I got to talk to a mom, and she was just like, I was like, I loved your daughter's essay. It was super great. And I understand so much more now about her and her personality. And she was like, oh, that's great. She won't let me read it. And I was like, it's totally okay, because it's fabulous. But this is something that is important, especially for kids that are going test optional, because it does add another level of depth to who you are, right? And that's the whole point, is them getting to see that they're not going to see on any other part of your application, this depth to the kind of student you are. And that's why they have the fun prompts that they do. So for those of you that are juniors, just know we typically start having kids write essays in summer leading into senior year. So as much as it's like, I can't believe that really that is right around the corner. It is right around the corner. What is the one thing that can still be dramatically changed? Oh, I'm sorry. I still have that poll up there, don't I? My bad. I've closed that. So this is just understanding that sometimes an SAT or ACT score can help offset other things in terms of your picture. So let's just say you didn't do super well in terms of COVID online learning, and your GPA didn't do super well during that time, but then it picked back up once you got back into the classroom. Well, GPA may never fully recover from that, but you have this is what happened thing to tell. And if you do score well in regards to your test, then they can put that into perspective in regards to the strength of your academics, and can also help offset sometimes the sake of scholarships. So I have heard colleges say, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. If your GPA is lower, but your score is higher, that I'll give you scholarship based on your score, right? So this is something where, yet again, keeping it and making sure you have it for your back pocket, just in case you need it, ain't a bad thing. And yet again, we have seen that sway in terms of things. If you do score well, that we can then use that in our benefit, right? All right, we said we were going to talk about our kids, and then we were going to match that up with what we were looking for in our schools. But tonight we are not going to talk about, is it West Coast, East Coast, or what kind of majors they have. I want to make sure that you understand kind of the behind the scenes stuff that nobody ever really talks about. But I am going to show you David Letterman style, how you guys typically pick your schools, and the students will get it first. Boyfriend, girlfriend, all my friends are going. We do know that that is sometimes sad but true. Education is cool. That's usually someplace sunny, right? It's a party school. Don't tell my dad. And good sports teams, right? That has merit, especially if we want to play a sport. But I always have that, hey, guess what? If you get hurt, make sure that you still like your school and you're going there for the right reasons. And parents, though, you're always super easy. Right? Money is typically the top of mind. Quality of education, though, we definitely do want that. I went there. We do get some parental pride in the mix. And any school within 2 hours drive of home. That's typically mom, right? Like, we don't want baby to go too far away. And window sticker, though. Pure vanity, right? Like, Princeton's going to look really good on the back of my Tesla. I have to pick Tesla because we got too many of them around here now. Okay. But this is, like I said, this is my David Letterman style. But this is my Cordy Can dancer. And this is something that I would just be tickled to hear from a kid. I would love to attend XYZ University. It's a great opportunity for me to study biology or history. And in fact, this university is well known for its outstanding faculty, and it's credited for being one of the best universities at which to study biology or history. And by the way, they offer the best financial aid package in comparison to their short list of competitors. Okay, this is my statement. Really though, there's two things going on here, guys. One, they already have an idea of what they're interested in studying before they step foot on campus. I am not saying your kid needs to know they want to be a mechanical engineer. I am saying if they have no idea of what they're remotely interested in, I said that wrong. If the college has no majors that they are remotely interested in, then why in the world are they attending that school in the first place? Okay. And then the other piece is they have the best financial aid package in comparison to their competitors. And we all know that schools are just kind of like in competition, but then there's also natural competition. So there's always the same kind of kids applying to the same kind of schools. So we can use that to our benefit in this process as well. Okay, attributes of schools, enrollment yield. What is enrollment yield? This is how many letters I have to send out in order to get butts in seats on the first day of school. So how many students have I enrolled in my institution? Okay. And why this is important is because the more challenging it is for colleges to get students, right? Like the more letters they have to send out in order to get not a ton of butts in seats, means that they have to work a little bit harder in order to convince those kids to come. All right. So if they are like, hey, I've got to, my cost is $65,422, they're going to say, I'm going to give you the honorary medal scholarship award in order to give you some convincing. And it's going to be $35,222. Congratulations. Welcome to Hiram. Okay. Or whatever school. And this is something that the elite schools, as we recall, they don't have this problem. They don't have to send out a ton of letters because they know that people are going to enroll. So a good rule of thumb is the lower the acceptance rate, typically if you start to drop below a 20% acceptance rate, right, then they're not going to have to work as hard. And when we look at their statistics, you're going to see they don't have to send out that many letters to get in. Their enrollment is typically fairly small at those schools as well. So there's this kind of balancing act. And this is this concept that we call buyers versus sellers. Some schools have to buy students and others do not have to buy students. Okay. And this was one of my favorite topics that we went over. If you guys have not read Jeff Salingo's Who Gets In and Why book, it's a really great, I did it on audiobook, but he dives deeper into all of this, right? Like college admissions craziness. So of course, right, like I'm all listening to it going, oh my gosh, this is what I've been teaching people for years. Right. He just beat us to, actually putting it down on paper and doing all of the jazz. But it's something that you don't always think about. And sometimes we have in our heads like, oh gosh, if they have an 80% acceptance rate, it's just not a good enough school. That's not true. Okay. Schools have different strengths in different areas. And it's the question of what's going to be the best fit. Remember that, right? For our kid, not necessarily the selectivity of said school, right? If we get rejected more often than getting in, and right now statistics lie because everybody's gone test optional, right? So schools have dropped from 20% acceptance rates down to 6 just because they had this huge inflation, right? Kind of starts to make you think about the statistics of stuff, right? So these are all of these pieces that we start to put into play around understanding the money side and where we have an opportunity then to get some discounts from schools. But if you think about a school like University of Washington, right, they don't have an enrollment yield problem. People are more than willing to go from out of state to pay the $55,000 a year in order to attend, right? So then they don't have trouble getting kids to come, right? So they don't have to give discounts then in order to do that. They don't have that problem. Now, the other piece of this is enrollment management, right? We're still talking about colleges enrollment. Typically you hear admissions tells me if I get in, financial aid tells me how much money I get. Enrollment management is the hat that lives above those two, because their job is to say, well, what is the best incoming freshman class that I want for my school? Sounds like admissions, but then how much money do I have to give them to convince them to come? Sounds like financial aid, right? It then logically makes sense to marry those two things together. And this is not a new concept, okay? It's been around since the 80s. The colleges have just gotten better at it. For those of you that like math, they call it logistical regression. Really, it just means that they're data mining and figuring out students and parents in terms of academics and financial picture, who looks just like you from the past, and then how much is it going to take them to convince you to come? It's kind of crazy, right? And so, and that's always the goal, right? Is we want them to consider our student to be the loveliest of all in order to give us those discounts, in order to make this more affordable, right? My rule of thumb in this process is to make sure that your student is in the top 25% of the college's incoming freshman class when it comes to their GPA and or test score, to make sure that you are maximizing getting the most money from those universities, okay? Some other rules of thumb in this world, we say to use a top-down approach. And why that is because we've got so much information out there. And usually the number one thing that I will hear from a family is, Crystal, I just don't know where to start, because there are all of these websites and all of these schools. My kid doesn't know what they're interested in, and they just throw their hands up. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And that's part of why we say, you know, it's the wisdom side in understanding how to navigate the waters, right? And we look at college from what we call a three-pronged approach. We want schools to be a good academic, social, and financial fit. When you hit all of those, that typically makes everybody happy. And then we've got a solid list of universities that we can apply to. So whenever we're working with a family, that's when we're creating a college list, unless I'm given authority to look at crazy, silly, expensive schools, okay? We're usually looking at where are we going to have the best well-rounded opportunity based on our student interest and major, social things that we think we're looking for in a school, and then where is it we're going to maximize getting discounts, right? So that then we can really hone in on a list that makes the most sense for us. And we like to say have 6 to 10 schools within your wheelhouse. And wheelhouse in my world does not mean have a whole bunch of reach schools and a target school and a safety school. What I mean by that is hone in on schools where you're going to be wanted and they're going to want you in return, right? Where it's not a question of you getting in, but it's a question of how much money they want to give you in order to come. That makes us feel good, okay? But I will say I am not here to kill dreams. If your kid has a reach school or 2 on the list, by all means, but my request is always don't make your entire list those schools, because it always ends in tears. And then being willing to travel from home can dramatically cut the cost. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but this is something that happens every year, is that, yet again, like going outside of our comfort zone, people will automatically think you got to stay in state sometimes because it's just going to be most affordable. And it's not always true, okay? And part of me is like, you know, granted, I have a client in Florida, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, the cost of the state schools there is so inexpensive, right? And it's like that in Ohio and a couple of other places. But it's like, okay, is always the state school the best fit, right? Comes back to that question. If so, great. If not, what are the other options? And are there other options in other locations that are going to give us, yet again, a good bang for our buck? So I've had clients go from Washington, right, to Florida, to North Carolina, to University of Alabama, you know, even University of Arizona. As just like a general example, if your kid can pull a 4.0 GPA by the end of their junior year, you automatically get a $36,000 per year scholarship. Okay. University of Alabama is doing it off of more of a test score focus, and or combination of GPA and test score, but it's one that they're essentially buying test scores. University of Arizona is buying for out-of-state students GPAs to bring in the smart kids, right? So all of this is different, different schools have these different opportunities. So yet again, then if you look at the math, then it can cost about $16,000 a year to go to University of Arizona rather than your state school, which, with flight, it probably is a wash, right? And then, of course, we also have to look at retention and graduation rates. So this is how many kids are coming back for sophomore year. So that's important. Make sure they like it. And graduation rates we talked about earlier, but making sure that we are taking into perspective as well what major we're interested in. And this is becoming definitely, I've seen it, right? It's an issue at University of Washington. It's an issue at Urbana-Champaign and other schools across the country where they're filtering kids out based on major. You may not get into University of Washington direct into their engineering or computer science program as an incoming freshman because it is so competitive. And if that's the case, then you don't want to go to University of Washington though, as just and expect to get in your junior year, because they don't do that. Right. So especially for those that are direct admit majors in those high profile programs, computer science, engineering, nursing, sometimes business, right, or some other kind of pre-professional pathways, it's important to take that into perspective as well. Oh, the money. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste this correctly this time because I know I've seen kind of some people popping in and out and all that good stuff. So as a highlight in the chat for you is the free community. It does have a copy of the slides from tonight's presentation, as well as the replay, but you'll see that bottom link is also a replay, so you can share that with friends. This is the last live class that I am doing this year, and I haven't figured out what my schedule is yet for 2023, so feel free to share that with anybody that you feel needs to know said information. And then we also have our Facebook group, so the replay will get shared there. I also share other resources and things that I come across as I'm doing research and working on stuff. So feel free to use any of that in terms of resources for yourself, or join in conversation in the Facebook group and asking questions. You may hear my husband yelling at cats, so I'm sorry. Now, this is just a comic. It's been running around for a while, but yet again, anyway. We got mom and dad going, move back home. Kids today are so lazy and irresponsible. Your mother and I started out with nothing. And we got the kid going, trust me, I would have loved starting out with nothing. Really, the moral to this is we just don't want our kid to go be a bad student loan statistic. There's a mouse and a cat behind me right now. I am sitting in a chair, but it didn't matter. Now, in my world, student loans also don't have to be a bad thing. You can use them for a positive. And I call it accountability and skin in the game. So it's just another way kind of flipping our thinking and realizing that we have the right to be able to borrow for the 4 years our kids are going to be in school, and we can help them repay however much it is that we want to help pay, because we want them to get done in 4 years. And our thing is we're only going to pay you for 4 years. So if they're going to take, for no good reason, right, an extra 5th or 6th year, then who should pay for it? Okay. But yet again, we don't want to just go borrow 200,000+ to go to a school without any ability to repay that, or just having, being that bad student loan statistic then at that point in time. Now, this is some of those all-inclusive costs like I was talking about at the beginning. And this is for Washington State, but yet again, right, like I've seen it similar in terms of where you are across the country. And it's really just to give you that perspective, right, in terms of this variance of these different costs. You'll see Eastern, I talked about earlier, is $21,000 a year on the low end. I guess University of Washington, with their miscellaneous expenses they threw in this year, is actually up to about $32,000. And that's our flagship state school, right? And then we've got our private school, University of Puget Sound, is at $75,000 a year. But I will tell you, they aren't actually $75,000 a year. And the most important statistic is that 25% of public college students will graduate in 4 years. National average is at 6.24 years for a 4-year degree, which is yet again why we talk about all of these things and making sure we get in and out in that timely fashion. Financial positioning. The good news is there is money out there. The bad news is that people will typically lose out on it in a couple of primary ways. One, not filling out financial aid forms correctly. And I say this, I have been living in financial aid form world for the last month here. And it's definitely something that overly reporting our retirement accounts or double reporting assets tends to be one of the biggest issues that we see. And so you wouldn't know that you didn't know your retirement shouldn't be reported unless you read the tiny fine print. And then understanding that there are rules and strategy when it comes to all of this. And I really do this comparison between the world of accounting and accountants. So an accountant, their job is to say, right, this is your tax liability according to the federal government, right? They've given us all of these rules over here, and this is what we can do to reduce it down. Okay. Well, people like me in my world, where we've been given some rules and strategy that we use within the world of the federal government as well to say, this is your college liability, but then this is how we have the opportunity to strategize to reduce that down, right? So same concept, different fields. And then one of the other things is looking in the wrong places for money. We like big money first, we like small money second. I actually did a Facebook Live earlier today as well that honed in on kind of scholarship and money. So that 5 minutes of your life, that would be a good thing to go watch in terms of that highlight. But then procrastinating until senior year. And I mean, no disrespect to seniors on this call. It's just understanding, as seniors know, like they ask a lot of us. And as your kids filling out applications for admissions, you're filling out applications for financial aid. And it's all these things, okay? And so if we want to strategize or we want to figure anything out and best make use of everything that we can, starting this as a junior is good. If you have a lot of financial concerns, having these conversations as a freshman or a sophomore is perfectly normal in my world and is encouraged even because then you have more time to kind of wrap your head around this whole process of everything. Financial aid is typically based on need and merit. So that's what we would typically think this, what's our income? How much do I have saved up? And then merit, which is all that fun stuff that makes up our kids. But then I have this other category on here called enrollment management. And this goes back to what we were kind of talking about earlier is what are the college's priorities? What are they wanting to pay to have students to come? I've seen students that have absolutely no financial need get grants from a college because they wanted that student or they wanted to make it a little bit more of an incentive. So they give them a housing grant. Okay. It's those kinds of things that then yet again, we're just best positioning ourselves at the universities. But on the financial side, some of it can get a little, for lack of a better word, shady, where if you have two students that are the same academically, but you have one family that has $100,000 in the bank and the other one has zero, who does the college have to give more money to in order to convince them to come? It's usually where I get like blank stares from people and be like, the answer is the one with zero. Okay. Because if you think about it from a college's perspective as a business, they go, okay, well, if you have 100,000 abilities to pay the college more than that other family who has zero, they're more than happy to take our 100,000 abilities to pay. Right. So it's where things start to become or feel a little bit unfair in the grand scheme of things. And yet again, it's just part of understanding some schools do this more, some schools do this less. But it's some of the things we have to take into consideration. Is there a time where you would not submit financial aid where it would probably not help but may hurt? So let's put it this way. If you don't, I'm trying to think of how best to word this. If you were saying, I'm applying to a whole bunch of elite institutions and I am not going to get financial aid anyways. I'm going to talk about this a little bit deeper here in a minute, but so I'm not going to submit financial aid forms because I make too much money or I have too much saved or whatever that reasoning is. then it's actually can hurt you at those schools because they want to see that you have an ability to pay them. In terms of admissions wise, unless they are need blind, they want to see that you can fork over the $80,000 a year bill for your kid to go. The question is, do you really want to? Right? That's a whole different story. And yes, we do have to wait to apply for financial aid in senior year. We're going to go through a timeline of everything, but we can calculate out based on a family's income and asset profile now what our expected family contribution number is, and then what that means to these different kinds of schools, which is also what we're going to talk about here in a second. Okay, now how much money is out there and where do we get it? So the good news is there's $196 billion out there, but one of the biggest chunks is in federal loans, and we like the free money first. So that is this bucket over here called institutional grants. And that is what it sounds. It's money coming from the colleges going directly to you. But you have to go back to my rule of thumb, make sure your kid is in that top 25% of the incoming freshman class in order to best maximize your opportunities to get the monies from that bucket. Now, if you guys look at my chart, put it in the chat box for me. What is the thing that's so small that it didn't make it on my chart, but everybody always talks about it? What's the one thing that's so small? And I don't know if I can. I know you, I see your hand raised. Do you not have access to the chat box? Scholarships. Yes. So this is where I like to define the word scholarships. And here is the $500 BECU scholarship, the $1,000 Rotary scholarship. Okay. The I went and hit my counseling office up scholarship. It's not that I don't want you to do it. I just want you to know when it's beneficial and when it's not. Okay. So if you say, Crystal, I'm just applying to a whole bunch of state schools, then I'm going to tell you you're best off to go hit up your counseling office and apply for those scholarships, because it's going to be a great opportunity for you to reduce down the cost. Okay. But if you say I'm applying to some in-state, some out-of-state, some public, some private, then I'm going to tell you, you want to maximize the institutional grant money first before you go and get the outside scholarships. And if you are a need-based candidate, they also have a formula for this. And so sometimes when we go and get those outside scholarships, it can reduce down the aid a college would give us. Okay. So then it's important to know if that's going to be the case for us. So the formula is the COA, which is the cost of attendance. That is the sticker price that we looked at earlier for our schools, minus our EFC, which is the expected family contribution. So that's when you fill out financial aid forms, how much the government is going to say you can afford to pay for school. So if you subtract one from the other, you're going to get a need. If you go get a resource like a scholarship, then they can modify your need. So here you can see that our school cost $38,000 a year. Our EFC was 24, so then we needed 14. But then we go and get that $2,000 Rotary scholarship, and that's where we go, oh, great. That means I have $2,000 less than I need to pay for school. Not necessarily. What the college can do is they can modify your need from 14 down to 12. So now me as an institution, I only need to give you 12 grand in order to come. Congratulations, you just saved the college money. All right. Now, as a side note, they're supposed to be doing a rebranding. I think it's funny because they changed the name to the expected family contribution to the student aid index. But as we're filing forms, they still haven't changed that name. It still says EFC. So, it takes the government a little bit of time in order to get some updates together, but they have some stuff on the docket. So we've also just been talking about what those changes look like for families and when and if they do come into effect, how that can benefit us or not. But essentially just know that it is a rebranding of the current name and some aspects of the formula. Now, the timeline in regards to all of this and the different kinds of forms that are required of us. The first one is the FAFSA. So that's the federal application for student aid. It is based on a 2-year look back of your student's graduation year. So if you're a 2023 student, you are going to be using your 2021 tax year. If you're a 2024 student, you're going to use the 2022 tax year. So as we know, sometimes things change in our financial picture in a 2-year window of time. So we have to then also come back and look at, well, what are those impacts in regards to taxes, if we have any, and starting to see how best we can, we call it look dirt poor on paper for the sake of financial aid forms. But then there are some schools that also ask for the CSS profile. This is done through a student's College Board account. So for those of you that are filing financial aid forms right now, it is good to confirm if any of the schools your student is applying to also ask for that CSS profile. It is a deeper look into your financial picture. And so making sure that everything is consistent from one to the next, also important. And then some schools like the high-end institutional, like Princeton and that sort of stuff, are going to ask for institutional specific financial aid forms, because then they're going to ask for everything under the sun to make sure they didn't miss any possible resource that you could use to pay for college before deciding to fork over any of their own funds. Okay. Now, there are also college-specific scholarship forms. I think a great example of this is Washington State University. They've got, once you finish your application and you get your access to your portal, then there is a scholarship application that you can fill out. So it's the university has a whole bunch of donors that have given them money, and now you fill out one application in order to get put into the running for that. Right. That is also a great opportunity to yet again take advantage of in regards to school specific scholarships that we don't always realize are there, because the email communications go to our students and not to us. So it's good to follow up with them in regards to any of that communication that may be happening. And then if we're divorced or separated or we get verified, there can be a lot of other pieces, have businesses, stuff that can go along with this. My number one rule of thumb is you fill out financial aid forms. And I said this a little bit earlier, but I would say when it comes to financial aid, probably one of the primary things I hear from families is, Crystal, I'm not going to qualify for financial aid. So why would I bother to fill out financial aid forms? Right. Well, and you know, if that's you and you make high income, have high assets, great. Okay. A lot of my families are in that category. I have a lot of others that are also in the need-based category. And really it's just that, oddly enough, right, some schools will actually give merit money for filling out financial aid forms. Regis is actually an example of that in Colorado. They give a $3,500 housing grant just for filling out the FAFSA. And they say it is just because you filled out the FAFSA, right? That's free money that's there just for filling out the form. Okay. There are others, right? If you have a change in your financial circumstance, especially at the elite institutions, and you didn't fill out forms, they won't let you go back and qualify in that year. You can't get money. And sometimes they'll even have a hold on, you can't do it the next year too. Like they're real sticklers about it. Right. So there are a lot of these reasons. If you fill out outside scholarships, they may ask for the report that you get once you file your financial aid forms and all of this stuff. Right. So it's kind of just like having your SAT and ACT scores for your kids. You have them if you need them. You file your financial aid forms as well as parents to make sure that you're crossing all of your T's and dotting your I's and all of that good stuff. And like I said, the elite institutions, especially too, if you have the ability to pay, they want to see crazy, right? Oh, they want a full pay candidate to come to fund those that can't, right? Like there's multiple facets of all of this stuff. Great question, Stephanie. So in the case of divorce, how do you handle the FAFSA, or in these cases, one or both parents, etc.? So the rule of thumb right now on the FAFSA is we look at both parents and we go, okay, well, do you split your kid equally? Oh, and I say this first. It does not matter who claims the kid in regards to taxes. That's usually the number one confusion. Taxes has nothing to do with financial aid forms. It's the who supports the student 50% of the time or more, or who does the student live with 50% of the time or more. And if you split them equally, then we go with who has less in terms of income and assets. Okay. So typically whenever I meet with families that are divorced, then I'll do And families don't have to share information with each other. They can share it directly with me for me to do a side-by-side not sharing data with each other conversation and calculate out what it looks like so that then we can make that best determination. Do that all the time. But the thing is, on the FAFSA, it is one parent that based on those ground rules. And then the CSS profile is also that same parent. However, there are universities like the Princetons and the University of Denver's that have what they call a CSS profile. That is where they're going to ask you on the CSS to put in what they call that non-custodial, the other parent's information. And then they're going to get a ping to be able to upload their data for their income and assets directly to the college, which in some instances then means that we may not qualify for need-based aid because they look at the other parent's information. Okay. And this happens all the time. Actually, earlier today, one of my seniors that I met with, we're using mom's financial aid forms and her expected family contribution is drastically low. And all of the schools on there are specifically schools that don't ask for dad's information, including University of Chicago. They're the one elite institution that doesn't ask for it. But it's one of those strategies then is looking at schools where we can maximize that need-based opportunity, especially if we do qualify for it. You said we can apply FAFSA while we are junior. No, we do not apply for FAFSA while we are a junior. We apply for FAFSA in October of senior year. So the intention, I just had a boot camp with all of my clients last night where we were filing forms. I also filed 2 financial aid forms today. And so we kind of just say October through November is like that range when we start to get FAFSA submitted as a senior. What I was talking about, I'll clarify, is that we've got, it's in a couple of slides. I'll clarify in a couple of slides in regards to what I think you interpreted. How much is a high amount of money? Adam, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you clarify? So remember, your rule of thumb though is always fill out your financial aid forms. Okay. Think of it like your taxes and your kids having to do the SAT and ACT. Okay. But this goes back to understanding that there's a different quality of aid that colleges give. So yet again, if we need it based on the calculation, obviously we want the colleges to give it to us. So here you can see the school costs $30,000 a year. Our EFC is 10, so we needed 20. They gave us 100% of what we needed, 80% of that in the form of free money and 20% in the form of a loan. So when you add it all up, it was then $14,000 a year for the $30,000 a year school. Now here, this school looks cheaper at $18,000. Our EFC is 10, so we needed 8, but then the school gave us 50% of what we needed. So this is what we call gapping. They shorted us how much we needed in order to go because they only gave us $2,000 in the form of free money and $2,000 in the form of a loan. So when you add it all up, it was $16,000 a year for an $18,000 a year school, right? And this is the disclaimer again, just because it looks cheaper doesn't always mean it's the cheapest school on the list by the time you are done. And I met with somebody a couple of weeks ago is out of Oregon, and she had gone and visited some of she's not out of Oregon. The borderline, when they're on the border, they always put Oregon schools on because they're closer for them than it is for them in Washington and coming up here in our general Seattle area. But she was on the border. So she's actually a Washington resident, and she had like University of Oregon and Oregon State on there. And I was like, these are going to be way more expensive. And with their income and asset profile, I was like, no, you guys qualify for need-based aid. So I know you got freaked out by the cost of Lewis and Clark and all of these other schools, but I can tell you right now that all of them are going to be cheaper than going to any of these state schools because they're going to give you more money and fill more need, and you have a strong academic student. So I was like, you need to apply to these schools to maximize your, kind of scholarship opportunities from them. And then I got an email back from mom saying, thank you so much, because it was really like, she didn't even think that these were a possibility. And it was really exciting then for her to be able to open up that scope. Thank you for having us see that like they didn't have to be so scary expensive. Right. And that's the point. is starting to really see this for where we fit in yet again, and what kind of money it is that we can get from these schools. And more strategy, kind of diving a little bit deeper in regards to the FAFSA. And this is where I'm going to clarify kind of what I was talking about earlier. Now we have family A and family B. All of their information here is the same. The only thing that is different is this expected family contribution number. And why is that? Well, family A was like, yeah, I know that there's this thing called FAFSA and I got to fill it out, and it's senior year. So I've done it. And my EFC is a little over $19,000 a year. But then family B was like, okay, well, you say there's some strategy involved in this. So we analyzed their information prior to submitting financial aid forms to be able to see what they could do to change and reposition any assets or information that may have been overly reported in order to reduce down our expected family contribution. And in doing that, they were able to reduce it down to about $8,300 a year, right? So that's about a 10 grand difference for 4 years. So we may have just spent $40,000 more for school than we needed to. Part of this game then is understanding what our expected family contribution number is, and it teaches us something. It tells us, do I qualify for need-based money, merit-based money, or both from a college? That's what it does. Okay. So this is the thing that we can calculate out now. We do not file financial aid forms until senior year, but we can figure out what this number is now with that information, and then talk about strategy to see what it is that we can do in order to make any changes, or does it even make sense to do so? So this is where it becomes, this expected family contribution number is going to mean different things to different kinds of schools. For our flagship state school, it's going to say one thing. If you apply to a Stanford, it's going to be another. If you apply to a Lewis and Clark, it's something different. And that number, yet again, is that teaching tool that we use to be able to show you how you know what kind of money you can expect to get and why, and where our student then also fits into that picture within the incoming freshman class of the college. So Adam, I hope that my statement did just kind of clarify that in terms of income to qualify for financial aid, how much money is too much money in terms of qualifying. Is it depends. It's the best answer to everything college planning because it does. It depends on your student, it depends on the financial picture, and it depends on the colleges. So that's why we have those things that we're looking at in terms of that circle of life to best understand that whole process and where we do qualify or not. Todd, great question. Does submitting an early application to a school reduce your chance to get aid? Early decision can. So in demonstrating interest, the biggest thing you can do is apply early decision because you are saying unconditionally you are in love with University of Chicago and you want to go there no matter how much they say it's going to cost. Okay, that's what early decision means. We only do that, like the girl I was talking to earlier, and they actually make parents and counselors sign off on students applying early decision. Everybody knows and is agreement that this is what's happening because it's binding. And the only reason we did it for her is because it is her #1 school, and it does increase her chances of getting into University of Chicago and doing so, because they're going to pull first from their early decision pool, and very small fraction of kids at those kinds of schools get in regular. And then from there, we knew how much roughly she was going to pay because we know her expected family contribution and we know what kind of money U Chicago gives, and they don't look at dad's information. Okay, so we had all of those things going for us. Those are like the best scenarios for kids in terms of that kind of thing. And on the other side, though, is if you are okay with that total cost, right? And we have a high income, high asset profile family. And we know because we can calculate out and been doing this for a while, well, it's going to be an $80,000 a year school and you find value in paying for that, then it is also, yet again, goes back to, it is beneficial to apply early decision at a high profile school like that, because then they know you're willing to come and able to pay. Okay, so there's a couple of different, yet again, kind of facets. I would say 99.9% of my students every year, though, apply early action because it is not binding. Similar deadlines, typically between November and December, right? So like I said, we are in the throes of that right now. November 1st is our first deadline coming up here on Tuesday. And this is where you apply early, you find out early, you often are maximizing scholarship opportunities. And so that's what we like to take advantage of. And or kind of priority deadlines for some of the schools, because Montana, University of Montana is a great, Montana State is a great example, because they do a scholarship as a state school. You apply early, but if you don't apply early and then fill out the scholarship application for their scholarship stuff, you don't get anything and you pay out of state. So they have a two-step process for them, and the application for the scholarship is early. So they're trying to weed kids out so they don't have to give as much money. Lots of things, guys. Alrighty, now understanding that though there are different kinds of assets on financial aid forms, this is what we call an accessible or non-accessible / exempted asset. Retirement is exempt. I mentioned that earlier. You do not list that as an investment on your financial aid forms. 529 accounts are not exempt. They are a parent-owned asset for the sake of financial aid forms, and you will report 529 money for every single student in your household. Okay, this is not just for your student that is applying. Okay, so as much as we love 529 accounts for the fact that you were smart and you saved, sometimes they can hurt us in this grand scheme of things. So people will always hear me say, you know what, it's good to assess the overall financial picture to determine, is it worth changing out of the way that we are saving into another way of saving to maximize getting scholarships and money, or not, because 529s are not exempt. And so when you got to remember who set up all of these rules. The federal government, right? They created a 529 account in order to say you can save into that and not have to pay taxes on the growth when you take it out for college related expenses in the future. Sounds like a great deal. Tiny fine print that when you save, right, you have to report that money in terms of financial aid, and some then students can lose out on money in the future because it's there. Oh yeah, thanks for telling me that. Okay. And then understanding how formulas treat different assets if they're owned by a grandparent, a parent, or a student. If money is owned by a student that in their name, then that's the worst place it can be, because the college will take more of that and say you can afford to pay more for school because it's there. And then if money is owned by a grandparent right now, it does not have to be reported on financial aid forms because it's not owned by you. But where it catches us is when money is distributed out of that account, it's supposed to be reported to the income, reported to a student as non-taxable income, which means that yet again, if we're a need-based candidate, we can lose out on aid dollar for dollar in future years. So who owns assets and how we use them becomes important for the sake of financial aid forms. And if we have business, homes, vacation properties, there's lots of different ways we can value stuff. So I met with somebody yesterday where we were talking about all of his business stuff and properties and who owned what and how it was listed and all of that. And I was just like, well, this is what we don't report. This is what we do. And this is why. And so, or what is the valuation of some of these things? We like to accurately report. We don't like to overly report. And there's a lot of tax and financial aid ramifications for all of this stuff combined. As you can tell, we're talking, right? My background is in finance. We're talking about a lot of these different components. And so often the earlier we start planning or strategizing, sometimes the more stress we can alleviate in regards to this process. But also, and just starting to understand kind of what these different things mean for us, for, you know, having one kid in school, two kids in school at the same time, and that kind of stuff as well. Doesn't everything financially change each year? Yes. My daughter got aid her first year, but not the same amount her second year. Nothing significant changed with regards to the FAFSA. So I'd have to review to tell you kind of what I see in regards to that, but it is true. We do have to fill out financial aid forms every single year. I think I posted a meme about that not too long ago. But it is something that we have, like every single year, right? If our financial picture changes, they want to know, good or bad, so that they're going to adjust our award accordingly. So whether it was because of a grant that went away, maybe it was just a one-time award offer or something like that, and then we would have to take a look to see what that change was. Okay, building a plan on how to save and pay for school. Really, in college funding, we talk about it from the must-haves and the would like to haves. Yes. So, so my email, I know I know some people have to hop off. Crystal Clear College Planning.com. There you go. Yes, that is correct. You can always feel free to reach out to me via email. There will be some other, it has an info page. We're almost done. So you guys will see that here momentarily. But yeah, you can also hit me up in the Facebook group or whatever as well. All right. So building a plan on saving and paying for school, there's what we call like the must-haves and the would like to haves for those things to maximize yet again our opportunities. And one is, whenever we save, we like stuff to be exempt from the financial aid calculation. So making sure that it hits that category is important. And then we like our stuff to grow and not have to pay taxes and all of these other pieces, have a good rate of return. But college is expensive. So we also want to be able to save as much money as we want to, but we also don't like it to tank like the stock market has been doing recently. And we like to be able to use our money how we wish, right? So I always think of it from, you're planning for college, but if you don't need it, you have it for retirement, right? So that's always that perspective whenever you talk about anybody that works on the college funding side, is how do you make sure that you're checking off as many of these features as we can, but most importantly, just that you feel confident in how you have a plan to help save and pay for school for how much you want to help with, right? Or just start to set that kind of in motion for yourself as like just that reoccurring thing that then, okay, I've got that $1,000 a month or whatever that I'm setting aside to make sure in the long term, at least then you can help out with something and that you feel comfortable with that, right? So, and this is also just where we start to have those conversations then of, if we have saved, what does that look like? If we haven't saved, what can we do about it? And starting to best prepare. Timeline for life. So junior year, we talk about EFC, running our expected family contribution number to see what that looks like and understanding what that means, and building our plan on how to save and pay for school. Really, that can start as early as you want it to, right? If you're a freshman or a sophomore, like I said, you're not too early in this process. But if we haven't started come junior year, or we're a senior and we still have questions on things, right, then anything is fair game in terms of getting that process started. But junior year is where we do start diving into career and aptitude testing and talking with students about what it is that they want to do, what that means. PSAT, a lot of your kids just got tortured with that. And this is really a matter of national merit. So if your student has a really high, is really good at test taking, then that can put them in for also big scholarships from universities or corporate donors. So it can be a good reason, if your students are sophomores now and they're good at standardized testing, to make them take it come junior year. It's kind of silly nowadays that they make it required for sophomores, but optional for juniors, when junior year is the one that actually matters for something. And then SAT, ACT, we talked about. In a grand scheme, we like to get that done in junior year if we can, and then start doing our college search and check the status of our high school path. So what classes it is that we are taking. Hold on, I gotta go close my door. You need to go in here. This is the cute one. but her mother likes to get toys in her mouth and then scream like a banshee. So there's that. So check the status of our high school path, making sure, right, are we taking the AP, the IB, what have you, and then find people to write us letters of recommendation. So my guidance on this is who knows your student best. And hopefully if you're a senior, your student has followed up with them and gotten that, so that then that will be submitted for the sake of their applications here soon. But we look for typically 1 to 2 in terms of teachers, or also what they call an other, which would be an extracurricular, so like a job or volunteer activity or sport, and that sort of stuff, where somebody else knows them in another capacity is always a great thing. And then we start working on our resume and do college visits, which is the fun thing, right? Getting to go get on campus, really see what these schools are about. And trust me, it will help with whenever you ask them something and they say, I don't know. That's your favorite thing, right? I don't know if I like it to be a small or big school. I don't know if I like it to be in the city or not, right? Well, then it's nice to get to go see these different kinds of campuses in order for them to start to get a feel and what they like to call the vibe, to see really how then they feel about it. Senior year, though, we like to finish strong academically. Colleges do ask for final transcripts, so we do want to make sure that we continue to do well. And then SAT and ACT, again, typically colleges will accept scores up through the November test date for early action deadlines. But trust me, it is torture to wait that long, and it's nice to get it done kind of at the beginning of your senior year if you absolutely do have to take it again. Continue refining our college search if we need to, do more visits and applications. Like I said, my other kind of rule of thumb is if you smell turkey yet and haven't filled out your applications yet, that's what those 4 days are for. But in our world, like I said, early action is a primary focus. And so typically applications are in between November 1st and December 1st for most schools. Some of those elite ones, though, do have regular decision deadlines out to January. And then we start filling out the FAFSA in October, and then the CSS profile typically will follow it, as well as institutional forms. And then you'll start hearing back from your schools with initial award offers if you applied early action come December. But you'll start to get your final award offers with all the monies in all categories kind of February to April for most universities. And then you're going to make your final decision come May 1st, put in your housing deposit, and you are on your merry way. In Washington, we have Running Start. Yes, while in high school. So is it beneficial to do Running Start if my child wants to go out of state for university? So Running Start, the way that works is if you do part-time or full-time, I should say, if you do full-time and you do the direct transfer agreement, there is an agreement within Washington state that those full 2 years of credits will transfer with you to our state schools and some of the private schools. Okay. And then I've had a lot of kids that also, a lot of the state schools in our surrounding states in the WUI program will also accept most, if not all, of those credits. But often if you're looking kind of outside of that, it is the college's discretion, especially if you only did partial Running Start and that sort of thing, where they're going to then look at what credits match up with their general education, right? So history, English, math, science, those are the ones that are most likely going to transfer, and the elective classes will not. So then you're going to see, depending on the level of full-time versus part-time and that sort of stuff, that you're going to have maybe a year up to 2 years worth of credits that may then transfer with us. So it can be beneficial and also free them up in terms of time to kind of explore other areas of interest and that sort of thing. Am I a better fan of AP or college in the high school? Honestly, I don't It doesn't really matter either way. AP in terms of college level credit, it's going to be based on how well your kid scores on the exam as a 3, 4, or 5. If that wound up being the intention, college and the high school, you're paying for the credit. So yet again, as long as it's a general education credit, that university though is going to determine whether you're going to get that credit for it. They're both rigor. I found a couple of colleges that don't accept AP classes if taken as a sophomore. Is that normal? As an AP exam as a sophomore, that would be, I'd be curious in you sending me the information on that, because it's typically just straight up whatever. IB, we find issues with that, with it being higher level or lower level, but AP is typically just, okay, let me write that down. Holding my kitty, Wake Forest. I'll look into it. AP as a sophomore, question mark. Okay. And we got case studies, and then I'm happy to come back and hang out for a little bit in terms of answering any other questions and stuff that you have. I'm so happy that she's snuggling with me right now, though, guys. UW has a percentage acceptance of students transferring in from community college. Is Bellevue College considered community college now that it's a 4-year program? Yes. So Bellevue College is only a 4-year college for specific programs. Everything else is still considered for a community college. So if you're transferring in as a transfer student, and I will clarify, if your student did full-time running start and graduates from high school with an AA and a high school diploma, they're still an incoming freshman if they are applying to colleges in their senior year of high school. They are an incoming freshman with sophomore or freshman year status for credits. It's a very big distinction. If you complete high school and then you are applying to a 4-year university, that is when you are considered a transfer student based on the level of college level classes you have taken at that point in time. Okay, so Alyssa, she is the oldest of 2 kids, had an SAT score of 1400, but parents didn't think that private school was an option. They did have an income of $72,000 a year, had some money saved up in some various assets. So their first run through of their expected family contribution was $26,000 a year according to the profile, and then $16,000 a year according to the FAFSA, which with 2 kids they felt was too much for them. But we were able to look at their profile of everything and see what they could do in order to reduce down their expected family contribution and strategize. And we were able to reduce down from the profile 26 down to 20, and on the FAFSA from 16 down to 10. But she also had schools that were a really great fit for her. So Whitman, WSU, Lewis and Clark, Gonzaga, PLU, and Richmond. At the time, Whitman and Lewis and Clark were both about $45,000 a year. Whitman gave her 31, Lewis and Clark gave her 26. So she is at Whitman paying about $14,000 a year, which is roughly the tuition and fees at UW right now. Rachel, though, she had an SAT of 1460. Trouble was that she only had 3 colleges that she was really interested in, and so she had to go back and do more of that college search component. She did find 10 that she really liked and applied to. They have a high family income over $350,000, and then they have about $300,000 saved up in various assets as well. So you can see their initial expected family contribution was about $116,000 a year, but then with some work, they were able to reduce it down to about $95,000 a year. So that's where most people then will default to, well, Crystal, that means and then obviously they're not going to get any money in order to go. And that's not true. What happened is she chose to attend Drexel. She got $34,000 for what was then a $52,000 a year school. So she went paying about 20 grand out of pocket. She also got an offer from the Illinois Institute of Technology. She could have gone there for just over $9,000 a year, but in the end, she chose Drexel. Now, really, there's 2 things that we need to be thinking about here in regards to this. Is one, was this a need-based award or was this a merit-based award? And most people will go, well, Crystal, they didn't need it, right? Like their expected family contribution was still really high. Like, so it was a merit-based award. I was like, okay, but then is it a pure merit-based award? And then they go, well, what do you mean by that? And this then the other piece is then how did we reduce down our expected family contribution from the 116 down to 95? And it's not so much it reduced it down, right? Because they have a high family income, the number is still high. But what it did is it took the $300,000 that they had saved off of the radar screen so that then the college couldn't look at it as an ability to pay. Okay. And this goes back to enrollment management. Okay, so was it a need or a merit-based award? It's a great category because the colleges, then if we go back to our example from earlier, right? If you have a Rachel and you have a clone of Rachel and they both have a high family income, but one of them has made themselves look asset poor, then sometimes it gives the college a little bit of sway to say, well, I don't need to give you as much money to come here as I do the other family because it looks like you have 300,000 abilities to pay me more than somebody else, right? So this is what's frustrating, right? It's this gray category between do we need it? Are we meritorious? And what is the college's agenda, right? All of these things married together. And all we're trying to do, right, is maximize our opportunities in all categories to make sure that we're getting what we want. So kind of to wrap up for you guys, we always say we want to understand what our expected family contribution number is. What does that mean in terms of these different kinds of schools and what kind of money can I get? But also equally important is what schools are going to be a good fit for my student to make sure that they're set up for success and that we've got those good fits for our major and all of that other good stuff. So one of the things that I offer to families who attend my class is what we call a 45-minute FAFSA review. So this is where we talk about your students' academics and your family's finances and start to teach you then what kind of money you can get to go to different kinds of schools. I do charge for that consultation. So it is $99 if you are a junior or younger. If you are a senior, it's $150. And that's also just because as a senior, we're likely going to be talking about your FAFSA, your applications, essay, all this other stuff, right? We're going to dive into all of it. And so I don't want you to have to pay me more. And we want to get done as much as we can in that session. But either way, what we do at an initial consultation is we calculate out our expected family contribution number so that you can start to really understand all of the stuff that we've been putting in context this evening. And so I'll put those links in here for you guys in terms of those different calendar options. And then I'll put in here for a final time as well, the link to the free community, the Facebook group, and then also just the general link to the replay for the class. So feel free to share if there have been people that you know that are kind of lost in this whole process as well. The recording for the class is always a great way for everybody to start in regards to this process. But when you do click on the link in order to schedule, what happens is that you will get an email confirmation from my system. In that email, we'll have everything that you need. It has a data sheet of information that I need back from you in order to best coach you on these steps in this process we've been talking about. It will have the payment link, and then it will have a Zoom link for you to join that session. Okay. And so I do have, I think if the calendar goes out, I was just looking at it earlier, through the end of the year. So feel free to find a time that works for your family around sports and other activities and stuff like that. My contact information is on here as well. You can always feel free to reach out in the future. And like I said, access any of those resources that you need within our community as well as our Facebook group. So I am happy to answer. I think I see another question in here, and I'm going to see if I can unmute you guys too to be able to answer those other questions that I'm guessing you have and don't have the ability to do chat box. So do you know if elite schools such as MIT accept Running Start courses? Great question, Adam. So the MITs and all of that are kind of, like I said, the exception and play by their own little thing, where typically they like to see that you stay at your high school and you do the most challenging classes there. And they usually like a reason behind you doing Running Start, like, oh, I don't have any challenging classes at my high school. And so this is a better environment for me, or whatever that is. for them to look at it in terms of the rigor being most important. And because let's put it this way, AP and IB are standards, right? Like, it doesn't matter whether you're in Washington or Ohio or Florida, the exam is the same across the country, right? So they know then if you got XYZ score or you took XYZ class that you were taught this certain curriculum, right? Whereas colleges, just like high schools, are different, and the grading scale or how they're doing those things, they can't get always the best representation then of what that rigor is. That be the reason why. If you're talking about normal schools, Seattle U, Lewis and Clark, right? Like University of Oregon, it doesn't come into play in that same fashion. That's yet again, it's the elite schools. So MITs believe that it takes 4 years to mold and shape you as a human being at the price that they charge. So you will have rigor in terms of coursework, but you will then be likely there for the full 4 years. Okay, let's see. Jessica, I think it just unmuted you. Well, it allowed you to chit chat. So if you would like to unmute and ask your question, you are more than welcome to. My dad has a rental property that is an investment, not a primary residence, but are not liquid. It's making my expected family contribution north of 500,000. Is there any way to lower it? So that is a challenge. So it depends. So colleges will look at equity in anything that's not a primary property, which is the problem. My guess is, though, that there's probably more to it than that in regards to the equity in just one property wouldn't make our expected family contribution number that high, unless it was like a fully paid off commercial property. So if there's probably other factors that are going into that. And honestly, depending on the kinds of schools, yet again, that you're applying to, if you want to have conversation about that, I'm happy to see, we can analyze and see if there is anything or what kind of monies just in general we might expect to see from the kinds of schools that are on your list, which is probably kind of the whole point. Oh, Adam, don't get me on a soapbox. I do not think that you have to go to an elite school in order to go places. I think that what you do when you get to any college, like a University of Puget Sound, I think is an awesome example. And yet again, going back to that, what kind of a school are you applying to? I've had parents that have gone to elite institutions tell me, I went to Princeton and my professors were doing research and they weren't actually teaching my classes and I never met them, right? So you're paying for this elite education that you're not getting from the professors that you would think that you are, right? You may be building some kind of big name connections with some people, which may be the point of why you might choose to do that. But it depends on also what kind of an environment you want to be in, what kind of personality you are. I'm fond of the University Puget Sounds of the world because of that one-on-one professor connection, because of their commitments to students getting hands-on and experiential learning. And I think that goes really far in building a student's resume and getting them to master's or getting them into med school or whatever they're, getting that job may be, because it shows actual depth. So, do you help to prepare financial aid forms? Yes, I have been in everybody's financial aid forms this week. So yes, we do help. We do kind of boot camps to teach people and understanding the process of everything, but then we're also in there verifying data and making sure that they are doing things correctly so that then things are submitted as they should be. Do trade schools offer the same ability for aid? They do not. Yet again, it's going to depend on the expected family contribution number and kind of that whole scenario of stuff. I actually had a kid who went to WyoTech, which is diesel mechanics in Wyoming. But it's a very unique trade school that's very focused in getting you in and out, and you can work on CAT, right, and go make a whole bunch of money doing big equipment. So that's one of those things that often the trade schools tend to come at just like a cheaper price overall. And sometimes it's just more a matter of then merit money at those schools, or if they even allow or accept the FAFSA at some of them. Yes. So, and the answer is not always. So I always tell people to, if you're not sure, so the question was, does one need to do FAFSA for merit awards, especially with a very high EFC? And the answer is no. It depends. It depends on the schools. And so, like, I met with a mom a few weeks ago, and she was just like, Crystal, you told me that I didn't have to fill out the FAFSA. And I said, yes, because you're looking at Montana State, and you said you didn't want to take out a loan and your income doesn't qualify us. This is what he needs to do to get money in scholarships. Well, his high school counselor is telling me that I need to fill it out for scholarships. And I said, yes, but for you, that doesn't count because this is the school that you're looking at and it doesn't matter. Right. So if I tell you, you don't need to fill it out, right, because we've talked about things and we got a clear answer to it, then yes, there are exceptions to things. But as a general rule of thumb, even if you have a high expected family contribution, it's good because, yet again, like a Regis or other schools will give us merit money for the sake of filling it out. Is the application acceptance process different if you attend community college for the first 2 years and subsequently transfer? It is not different in terms of the application process, and it's going to depend in regards to the schools that you're applying to for the sake of acceptance, because schools do have different transfer student pieces. Oh, so Lan, oh yeah, because I just, yes. So the answer is yes, I do help families submit financial aid forms, is the short answer to it. Okay. Awesome. Well, I am going to, I'll answer this one last question. I'm going to let you guys go eat dinner or do whatever it is that you like to do, as I need to go do that too. How much gift money can the student have, i.e. from parents? That's kind of that's worth more conversation, because money from a grandparent that's sitting in a student's account, the answer is 100% of that is going to go towards the expected family contribution. Is 529 accepted? Yes. So you would want to read the rules in regards to the 529 that you are in to make sure that then it goes towards the tuition and qualified expenses. And they don't have a disclaimer in regards to trade school being an exception to that. So it should, though. All right. You guys have been super awesome tonight. And you have the links in terms of information. You know how to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I will make sure that then, like, check your email for the follow-up in regards to the replay. You can send that out to people, or if you had a spouse or what have you that wasn't able to be here with you tonight. And then we will maybe see each other at a session or see each other in the future at another class, because some of you were younger. Okay, so have a good Halloween and a good night.